What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and today we're going to be going over the next part of the cleaning up the input buffers and command list section. And this will be the final part, because what we're going to do is we're going to make everything that's in our game work through the command list. So all of our inputs to date, all of our attacks and commands to date are going to work through the command list, and going forward we will only ever implement them in this way. When we started we were using booleans, and we changed that to where like light attack was a command, and once the command was buffered then it was performed on the next available frame, and that's working great, and it has been for a while now. In the previous episode we actually fixed up some of our other logic that we had for like directional attacks as an example. So instead of using the boolean, was light attack pressed, and when we were moving a certain direction and all that, instead what we do now is we check the command to see if we are currently in a specific state, such as walking forward or walking backward when we perform an action, and then that command will be buffered just like the other moves that we have in our system, and then it will be performed. So when you look at it in our AnimBP, it actually just triggers the specific command that it is supposed to, and also these commands will now be in our command list. So we don't have any specific logic that's unique to them that we have to keep track of or to make things more complicated. The other thing that is very useful here is that we are able to change our crouch and jumping attacks as well. And these attacks are now part of the command buffer, or the command list and the input buffer, as opposed to just checking if you're crouching and pressing the light attack button again, as an example. So we can successfully use all of the commands in our game, everything in our game, through the input buffer and the command list as a standard fighting game should, as opposed to any other additional logic that is not needed having to be added. So I'm excited for this change to take place. So to get started, we're going to go to our code, but before we actually look it over, feel free to click on this link right here. If you haven't seen any episodes of this series, we're on episode, I believe, 108, and we're pretty far along, as you can tell, but there's still a lot we have to do. We're nowhere near done, and so this playlist will keep track of everything that we are going to be doing and adding as the series progresses, from the very first episode. Otherwise, you may want to click this episode right here. This was the previous episode, and it is the one that covers the actual directional attack changes that we made. We're going to be making these changes to the crouching and the jumping, but we're also going to be adding some new states to our character. That way our logic can work as intended without any additional, booleans or checks that we shouldn't have to do. So to get started, we need to go to our fighter template character, or basically our base character class, and we have this character state enum, and it does things like tell us if we're default, really, which is no action, if we're moving forward or backward and running forward or backward, if we're crouching, if we were jumping and blocking. Now, crouching I added last episode. Previously we used a boolean for crouching because we had crouching as a state before, but you can also do like a crouch block, for example. And so I thought, well, we can't have the state being two states at the same time, so we'll want to break out the crouching. Well, that worked for a while, but think of it this way. We really can just have a bunch of different states that'll display to the screen, say in a debug or a training session, and the character should be doing that. Like if we envision this, if we were crouching and blocking, and boolean and the is crouching boolean was the only thing determining that we were doing a crouch block as opposed to a regular block, when we look at our character state in the game when debugging, or again in a practice mode, a lot of fighting games allow you to enable this functionality and see what state a character is in, then the character state would be blocking and not crouch blocking. Well, I didn't like that. So instead we're going to go back to the state system, but we're using all of our new stuff that we've implemented since then. That was a long time ago. So now we have a lot better stuff, and now we can do it properly. So I've added crouching back as a state, and we showed that off in the last episode. But I've also added crouch blocking now. We've had blocking, so that can remain. But blocking will be like a neutral or standing block, and then crouch block will be if you're crouching and blocking. I've also added the different types of jumps. This is not required, as you don't have to specifically be performing a certain type of jump to perform a lot of the actions. It could be based on the direction you're going or the animation you're in, as opposed to a specific state. However, I don't see a harm to it, as any of these jumps are useful for a lot of the logic. Like if we're neutral jumping, forward jumping, or backward jumping, then, do these. And then if we want to specifically say, if you're backward jumping, you can perform this attack, that will work as well. So it does have some benefits, although it's not completely required. I would recommend it. All in all, just add the crouch blocking state and separate the jumping states into the different types of jumps you can do. Neutral, forward, and backward. So neutral would be straight vertical. Forward, of course, forward, and then backward is backward. Now, there are a few things we can do that I have not done yet because I want to give you a live example just like I did in the previous episode. But we may want to get rid of the is crouching boolean now. There's no reason for us to have a boolean and an enum value that are tracking the same thing. A, it's confusing. B, it means we have to set things in more places and make it more confusing even. And then C, it's just more work than is necessary and more data that is being held and transferred than is necessary. So what I'd recommend is getting rid of the is crouching boolean. Now when you do this, it is going to, of course, give you errors because we use that boolean in a lot of places. So we're going to fix them up together live again because I hate modifying code by removing something and then not showing you. So I have implemented the new stuff already, but I'm going to show you what you need to take out. So we're actually going to close the editor here, and I'm going to build, and we're going to go through the errors together again, just like we did in the previous episode. All right, and here we go. So now that this has built, we have all the errors that come from removing is crouching. So what we're going to do is go to these locations and perform the appropriate action. This is crouching is in our constructor. You can tell by I'm setting all the default values for all the variables here. Well, we can get rid of it. We don't need to set that anymore since we no longer have that variable. The first one that we can go to is the jump function. So the jump function was previously checking if the character could move and they weren't in a crouching state, so it's not is crouching. Instead, we're swapping this to be the character state is not equal to crouching and the character state is not equal to crouch blocking. The rest of the conditions still apply, like how we checked the combo state and the jump count, so those don't have to change. Now, also in this function, what we have to do is set our character state to the proper jump state. So if the character, we have a bunch of other conditions now, so let's go over this all at once. If the character state is equal to moving forward and we're not facing right, or the character state is moving backward and they are facing right, we know that in one way or another, this is going to be forward or backing jumping, but it's going to be a jump that is applied to the left regardless. It is going to be a left jump. So we add the proper input icon to the screen, and then we make sure we launch our character with the proper jump distance and jump height. What changes now is we have to make sure to determine if this is a forward or backward jump. So we check to see if the character state is moving forward. Else, the character state is equal to backward jumping. We know at this point, if we got into this state, that it's not going to be a vertical jump, so we give it either forward or backward jumping based on the state that the character is currently in. Then the else if in this function is also very simple. It's actually the opposite. So we know that this is going to be a jump to the right. So we either check and see the character is moving forward and they're facing right, or the character is moving backward and they're not facing right. That means we know this is going to be a right jump. So we have to do the same checks here. We check and see if the character state is moving forward. If they are, this is considered a forward jump. Else, if they are moving backward, this is considered a backward jump. And think about it. If you're moving forward, that means you're moving toward your opponent, and you're facing right, that means you're moving right, so it's going to be a right jump. Otherwise, if you're moving backward and you're not facing right, then you know, yes, it's going to be a jump away from the opponent, which is going to be a backward jump. Now, lastly, we do have the vertical jump logic in here as well, where we add the appropriate input icon to the screen, and we launch the character, but make sure that we also now change the state from standard jumping to neutral jumping. The next one that we have, start crouching. Now, I've changed the start crouching logic a bit. We'll get into that in a minute, but let's fix all of our errors first. we can remove the isCrouching boolean from the startCrouching function. You don't have to set that value because, again, we're not using the boolean anymore. We're now using the character state enum to track this. As you can imagine, that also means the stopCrouching has the same effect. We can remove the isCrouching equals false line. Okay. All right, so now that we've taken out the errors in the startCrouching and stopCrouching, let's look at what we did to replace them. So we no longer set the boolean here to be, true or false based on what this function is doing, start or stop. Instead, we have to determine what state we want the character to go to when this occurs. So the startCrouching function fires when we press the down key or the down input on our gamepad or device, and that gets basically converted into this function call and says, hey, we are ready to set our character into the crouching state, or just basically be holding down and go into whatever state that is. So we want to be able to swap between a few things. When we start crouching, we should either be able to go to crouching or crouch blocking. You may have other states as well. So for me, here's what I do. If we call start crouching, I still do the same logic that I have in the past. We add it to the input buffer, add it to the input stack. We check and make sure the player can move, or basically they are able to act and do this action. And we make sure they're not in a combo state. So, if you're getting hit in the face, you probably shouldn't be able to crouch at the moment. You're in a bit of stun. And then we were calling the basic crouch function in Unreal. And here's where we were setting the boolean. We're swapping this now to do this logic instead. We check to see if the character state is not equal to blocking and the character state is not equal to crouch blocking. This is because when you start crouching, if we're in a blocking state at all, then we don't want to be able to go into the standard crouch. We should go into the crouch blocking because it should be, okay, I'm blocking, I start crouching, now I go into my crouch block. This is mainly important for manual blocking, as if you are automatically blocking, you'll be holding back to block and then down and back to crouch block. So it will be a little bit different. However, you can keep this logic if you'd like, because if you're blocking and you start crouching and you allow that, then you should go into your crouch block state. So simple enough. Either do this for manual blocking, or if you'd like, make them return to idle, and just if they're holding back and down, we will be crouch blocking. Don't worry. Remember what I said about directional inputs as enums earlier in the episode? Well, that can be used for things like crouch blocking for the automatic blocking. But for now, this won't hurt anything either way. Now, for stop crouching, it's actually the same. Just basically reversed. So as opposed to crouching if the character is not blocking and crouch blocking if they are in one of the blocking states, we're going to do the opposite. So we're going to say if the character is not equal to blocking or crouch blocking, and they're stopping crouching here, we're going to bring them to the idle state or the default state. However, if they were in crouch blocking, or just blocking as a state, and they're standing up, then they should go to the default blocking state instead. There's really no reason that we wouldn't want to go back to the blocking when we're uncrouching from a crouch block. If we're able to do that, then we should go directly to that state. We should go from crouch blocking to block, or, like we did here, from blocking to crouch blocking. All right, let's go to our next set of logic, which is going to be the move right function. So in the past, we were making sure that if we were going to move right, we weren't crouching. Now, most characters cannot move while they're crouched from my experience, so that's why we check that. You can get rid of that boolean now, and we just want to replace it with this simple check instead. Instead of checking the boolean, we want to make sure that the character state is not equal to crouching and the character state is not equal to crouch blocking. If the character is not in either of those states, then they can move. Simple enough. That's all you have to change there. The next one's going to be down below as well. We have an additional check. This is still in move right. Right here. This is still in move right. And so that was for grabbing the input for the direction they wanted to move and setting the enum properly for if they're moving forward or backward. This is for actually moving the character and then setting the character state to that value. So for this one, we also add not is crouching because we don't want to allow them to move if they're crouching. But I can get rid of that now. And instead, I can just replace it with the same thing we just did above. So if the character state is not equal to crouching and the character state is not equal to crouch blocking. It's very simple when you think about it. We're just replacing the Boolean with the two enum states related to crouching. All right, let's go to the next one. The next one is another else if statement. This statement is in move right as well. And we were checking if we were crouching to be able to perform diagonal inputs. So this is how we were performing like the automated and automatic blocking while crouching, is basically if we were pressing backward or pressing away from our opponent. It's also good for the input stack. It would print out the correct input. It would print out the correct symbol. Well, in that case, we were checking if we could move and we were crouching, because if we are crouching and we're pressing backward, then we are performing a backward block while crouching, or basically a diagonal backward. And so we had to be crouching in that case. Well, since that's the case, I can actually get rid of is crouching and instead check for this. Now, this is a little bit different. So we can be crouching, or in fact, we have to be crouching to go into this else if. Because that's the case, we can be either in the crouching state or the crouch blocking state. Either one would work here. This would work because you could be in the crouch blocking state if you're block stunned. So say you got hit and you are crouching, but you were blocking, you would go to block stun, but your character state would be crouch blocking. Your combo state would be the stun, specifically block stun. But your character state could be crouch blocking. So you could do this while crouch blocking, but also if you were crouching when this happened, then this would also occur. So you could do it for crouching or crouch blocking. So whenever is crouching was true, it's essentially crouching or crouch blocking. However, when crouching is false, we make sure that it's not either crouching or crouch blocking. All right. And for the last one, a move right controller, this is where we were checking if we are crouching. So if we are crouching, remember, we check if the character state is equal to crouching or crouch blocking. And it's that simple. I'm going to build again and see what other errors remain. We only have a few left at this point. So we also have the cases in take damage. All right, so for take damage, we have this initial area where we check to see if the block was successful that a character performed. So if the character performs a block in different stances, such as crouching or standing, is it going to succeed based on the attack that comes in? And that's what we have to swap some things around to fix. So in the very first line, we were checking to see if there was a successful block against a high hitbox. So if a hitbox hits high, or if an attack hits high, the way that the player can block it is if they're using a standing or a crouching block. So to make this work, what we can do is check to make sure that the character state is equal to blocking or the character state is equal to crouch blocking. Now we go to our next section here, which is where we were seeing if there was a mid hitbox, which is really just an overhead. So if there's an overhead, the way it can be blocked is by performing a standing block and not a crouching block. So that's important. It's specific. So you could see before we were checking to see if we were blocking and we weren't crouching. But now we have our states that we can use, so we can actually get rid of this logic. We don't need to check the character states here, like, oh, we're not equal to crouching or we're not equal to crouch blocking. That's wrong. We can get rid of all that. All we have to check for to block an overhead is if the character state is in blocking, which is standing block or neutral block, and the hitbox is mid. Lastly, we check against low hitboxes. So low hitboxes can only be blocked if they are crouch blocking. So before we were checking if we were blocking and we were crouching. Then I implemented some other things to check here to see if we were in the correct state. All of this is wrong at this point with our new changes. Now all we have to do is check to see if our character state is equal to our crouch blocking state, because the only way we can block a low hitbox is by crouch blocking. So we cleaned up this function a bunch. You can see how much easier it is to read this now. We were just basically checking if it's a high hitbox, mid hitbox, again, or overhead, or low hitbox. And now we can do that all with the character state. We don't have to check a bunch of other conditions. Okay, and with that, I believe all of our is crouching Booleans should be fixed up. and it builds properly. So those are all the changes you need to add crouching as an enum as opposed to a boolean. We will have to fix it in the NMBP as well because there are a few adjustments with it. As for the jumping enums, if we go to the landed function, we'll also notice a spot we need to adjust it here. So before, when we landed, we were checking to see if the character state was equal to jumping before doing any of this logic based on landing on the character. Now we need to know if we're in the jumping, forward jumping, or backward jumping state, as all of these states will need the same landed logic being done. So make sure you change that one from jumping to the new jumping states. All right. Now we're back at our friend here. This is move right. Remember, we just made this change earlier where we adjusted the crouching logic. We were also checking to see if this was a jump or not, if we're moving right during a jump, because we have to know this stuff, because if we're not jumping, we can then freely move the character, but if we are in a jump, then we don't want the character to have control over that jump. The jumps are locked in for how much distance and height you get based on the characters. So instead of just checking if the character state is not equal to jumping, you have to do the same thing here, where we check and make sure the character state is not equal to any of the 3 jumping states we have. The rest of the stuff in that if statement remains, and you don't have to touch it. Of course, since we changed it here, we also have to change it in move right controller. Remember, there are 2 functions, move right and move right controller. So make sure you change it in both places to allow for all these jumping states, or rather to check and make sure it is not any of these jumping states. And then lastly, we need to go to our tick function. We have logic to move our characters and face them the way that they should be. We don't allow characters to flip while they're in the air. So if they're jumping over the character, we don't allow them to flip and face the character until they touch the ground. That makes sense. So what we have to do is, instead of checking and making sure the character state is not equal to jumping, just like we did before, check against all the possible jumping states, which are these 3. One final time, the rest of the stuff in the statement remains, so you don't have to touch that. Just make sure you change jumping to all 3 of the jumping enums now. Alright, once you do that, you've fixed up all the enums and all the possible states that we could use for all of our attacks to date and going forward. We can always add more. Alright, so once the engine is back open, we can look at all the appropriate files that we'll need. We will need our specific character files because we are going to add the rest of the attacks and commands to our logic. So in their character commands array, we have all these commands and we have the ability to set a required state now. So we now have this neutral jump light that I've added. I've added a backward jump light and a forward jump light, or basically my 3 jump attacks. You can do whatever you want with these attacks. You don't have to mimic this, but I've just basically made a jump attack that requires the light attack input for all the jumping states. I made them max frames between inputs 1 because it's a single input command. And so doing that just makes our lives easier, and it's actually quicker because we don't have to iterate for as long. And I just set my required state to be the proper state. Again, all this was shown off in the previous episode. I'm just doing it for jumping now as opposed to my directionals. I've also done this for crouching, so I have crouching light and crouching medium, but you could have, many, many more if you want. So all I do here is I make 2 more commands. I set up a light attack, a press, 1 frame between inputs, and set the required state to be crouching. For the medium, I do the same thing, but I set it to be a medium attack for the input. Then all I have to do is actually grab these IDs and switch out my transition rules in my NMBP for all of these. You are going to have a few errors in the character NMBPs for the is crouching boolean we removed. So let's fix that up real quick. So you can see I have a walking forward to crouch rule that was using this is crouching boolean. Alright, so to get rid of that, very simple. I grab my character reference and I grab my character state. Then all I have to do, if I want to be able to go from walking forward to crouch, is I check and see if this is equal enum to the appropriate state. and that state is going to be crouching. You could technically do crouch blocking as well. However, walking forward to crouch blocking, if you want them to be able to do that in one go, you should just simply go from walking forward to crouch blocking. So I wouldn't ever want to go from walking forward to crouching when crouch blocking. I would want to just do it in one go. And to avoid confusion, that's all I'm going to do. I'm just going to check if it's crouching. Keep things simple. Now I have another issue as well. But it's very simple. It's just the opposite. It's walking backward. So I could actually have copied my transition or share the transition rule, but we can write it again. It's really quick and really easy. I'm just trying to keep it nice looking as well. I like to straighten all my nodes. That way, it looks as nice as it can. And there we go. It's that simple. Just to show that works, all I'm going to do is I'm going to load a game very quickly. And we are going to walk forward and press down and make sure that we can crouch. You can see while I'm walking, if I press down, I don't have to ever release the key. Now, you'll probably have a few other issues, specifically with crouching and crouch block, so I'm going to cover them now as well. So let's go over all of our transition rules in our NMBP now to make sure this is all correct. So we're going to make a few changes. First of all, let's do idle to crouch. So idle to crouch is what you can expect. It's the same rule that we just made. Okay? We no longer want to use the is crouching boolean. So wherever you find that, if is crouching should be true to go into it, we want to replace it with crouching, the state. So that's idle to crouching. And then if you look at crouching back to idle, is also different now. This is what it was before. I kept it in here so you could see it. We were checking it and making sure is crouching was false, basically. That's what this does. Well, we no longer have this boolean, and thus we don't need to do that anymore. Instead, what we should do is no action, because no action is our default. And if you look at our stop crouching function, if we're not blocking when we stop crouching, then we go directly into the default state. So if we're not blocking, then we should take this crouch to idle. So it should look like this. Okay. All right. Now, crouching to crouch block. This is something we also had, but our logic was different before. So crouching to crouch block, before what it was doing is we were making sure that the boolean is blocking was true, or since we didn't have crouching states, we then updated it to where blocking was the state. So it looked like this before, where we were going from crouch to crouch block. However, we now have specific states for that, and the states are determined in the code. So when we go from crouching to crouch blocking, then we go into the crouch blocking state. Let me show you what that looks like too. So if I'm crouching and I manually block, I can go directly to the crouch block state, and then when I release the block, I go back to crouching. All right. So let's take a look at this. So I have crouch block and crouch manual block. Now, the manual blocking system is not required. Remember that this series supports manually blocking and automatic blocking. They should not really be supported together, but rather separately. For me, I haven't separated them yet, so I've shown off both solutions here. So crouch to crouch block, all it requires is this state, because if you are pressing backward when you are attacked, we will want to set the state to be crouch blocking. If you're crouching and you're pressing backward when you are attacked, we'll want to set it to crouch blocking. And because of that, you'll automatically go into the block state for the stun time, and then you'll exit and you'll be good to go. Once that time is done, we'll go from crouch blocking back to crouch. And I'm not going to check if we're manually blocking or not, because, again, they shouldn't be used together, automatic blocking and manual blocking. So this is all you'll need for automatic blocking. You'll need crouch to crouch block using that character state, and crouch block to crouch using this character state. Now, if we're using the manual block technique, like I was just there, it's the same thing with an additional condition. we just want to see if we're manually blocking, which is a Boolean tied to the, an input on our keyboard. That is the block input. And so if we're blocking, if we're manually blocking, and we're in the crouch blocking state, then we want to go to crouch block. Otherwise, if we are manually blocking and we release the manual block, so you could specifically check if we're not manually blocking, but that's not required anymore because now our crouching and crouch block states are different and they can't exist at the same time. So if you are in crouch manual block and you just go to the crouching state, then you're automatically going to go to the standard crouch animation. So that's how you can do either method, automatic or manual blocking, manual or automatic crouch blocking, and returning back to crouch. Now, one final thing that we should do with the blocking, I'm going to show you here. So if you go the manual route, you should be able to go back and forth between these two automatically by releasing the up and down key. So if you're not crouching, you're going to do a regular block, but you could start crouching and then release it, and you can switch between these block forms just by holding that button. So to do this, all you have to do to go from crouch block to manual block is you want to make sure that the character state is just regular blocking. If you're already in the crouch manual block state and you go to the blocking state, that's the standing block. So we can go straight there. Alternatively, if we're in the blocking state, all we want to do is, if we're in the crouch blocking state, we go to the crouch block. So to put it simply, this is what it looked like before. We were trying to determine if we were crouching and we were in the blocking state. No. If we want to go from crouch manual block to manual block, all we have to do is this. Otherwise, if we want to go from the standing manual to the crouching manual, all we have to do is this. So that's taken care of. Those are all the crouching states with the crouch blocks as well. Now, the other things we have to do are set up to make sure the commands also work from our crouching state. So sure, we added a command for crouch light, but how do we actually make it work? Well, before, all we were doing is we were in the crouch state to go from crouch to crouch light. We were just checking this Boolean. But we don't want to do that anymore. So I'm getting rid of it. Instead, what we want to do is we want to check and rely on our command list. And so we need to check the item that relates to that command in our character. So the crouching light attack, which is what we're trying to achieve here, is index 18. You can see the index right here, this number. So to go to crouching light, when we're in crouch, all we have to do is see if has used command on 18 of the character commands is true. And if so, we're going to go straight there. Now, we already filled out all that logic in the previous episode for how that can work in the input buffer and the command list, so you don't have to change anything here. Just make sure that this is how your actual transition rule looks. And this is how we do all of our commands. If we look at a completely unrelated one that hasn't been changed in a while, such as light attack, you'll see that this is the same. This is how we did it. Light attack is the first index, index 0, in that array. You can see I don't need the was light attack used anymore. So we did this. And this has been going on for a while. We just never had these other states, like the directionals, the crouches, and the jumping. So that probably means you know what to do with the crouch to crouch medium. Basically, instead of using was medium attack used, we get rid of that, and we just access the specific command we'll need from the character commands array, which is 19 for crouch medium. Now, I don't have others, but you could have more. You could do, crouch heavy, crouch special, whatever. The other things you have here are actually good. So nothing has to change for crouch hit reaction, and nothing has to change for any of these crouch attacks back to crouch. Like, all that stuff's the same. The only thing you change is the specific type of block you want, and then the actual entrance to the specific crouch attacks have to update to use the command list. All right, with that done, crouching should be fully functional, and we're good to go on to the next part. So for the next part, what we'll want to do is go over our jumping states and attacks. So I have added the 3. I've added a neutral jump light, backward jump light, and forward jump light. So let's cover each of those. So now we have to change when we want to be able to perform specific jumps. So for starters, we can go from idle to start jump just by checking neutral jumping as opposed to just what was called jumping before. So this has essentially stayed exactly the same. It's just that we will now have to check for neutral jumping as opposed to jumping. So make sure that is the correct state that it's checking for. Then realize that we can do one of two things here. You could either go from idle directly to forward and backward jump, or stick with the system we have where only walking forward can go to forward jump and walking backward can go to backward jump. Regardless of what we do have to set this logic up properly. So if we're going from walking forward to forward jump, there's two things we could do. We could either access it by neutral jumping or by forward jumping. Now, if we're walking forward, we should automatically be forward jumping, not neutral jumping. However, as a safety net, since assuming we don't want to be able to jump backward while walking forward, we can always make sure we check neutral jumping or forward jumping and automatically do a forward jump on that. It's just a safety net. You don't have to use it if you don't want. Okay? Walking backward to backward jump is the same thing. You can check neutral jumping or backward jumping. Basically just making sure that if we're in this state, walking backward to backward jump, we know that we're going to be backward jumping. We're not going to jump the wrong way. Of course, all of them go to end jump. This is how it has been since the very beginning, and I don't change anything with that. But all of these attacks do go, or all of these jumps do go to a specific attack node. That also has been the same way since the beginning, but guess what we were doing? We were using the specific booleans, and that's incorrect. So we want to take these out, and we want to replace it with what? Character reference. We want to grab our character commands array. Then we want to get a ref. And we want to get it at the appropriate index. So this is forward jump to forward jump attack. That's what the state is called. We'll just assume we have one jumping attack for now, which is forward jump light. That is index 17. So I'm going to put 17 in here. And then I'm going to break. And then I'm going to click down on that to get access to all the variables, and I'm going to use hasUse command as the result. There we go. And now when we're jumping in the air, if we're doing a forward jump, we should be able to perform the forward jump light. We can now copy this, go to our backward jump to backward jump attack, get rid of what was in there previously, paste this, set it up the same way that we did. Oops. And change the index. So for the backward jump light, it is index 16. Lastly, we want to go back to the state machine one final time, and we want to go from any of the jumps that can perform a neutral jump attack. So specifically from start jump to neutral jump attack. I know it's a little hard to see because of the arrows, but it goes from start jump to neutral jump attack. That's the one I want. And you can see that this has been adjusted, but slightly incorrectly. What we should do here is the same that we've done everywhere else, but instead we have to make sure that we use the neutral jump light. That is index 15 right here. And so we put in index 15, and we are good to go. Another thing that'll have to be done with the end jump and the jump changes we made is the end jump to idle change. So end jump to idle, we should only go back to the idle state once we've actually landed. You could either do this by triggering this on the landed function, or simply when we are no longer neutral jumping, forward jumping, or backward jumping, we can return to idle. Now it is important to note that of course if you get sent out, like launched, we do have other logic for that has a higher priority and will be taken first. So it's up to you if you'd rather use the priority order to rely on this, such as this node right here, and jump to launched, or if you'd actually rather just reset, once the state gets reset, check against the default state here to make sure that we are still in it, such as this. I think this one's easier and better, but it doesn't really matter. Okay, and we can also go over the blocking logic as well. A lot of it doesn't have to change, but we should change it to work with the crouching logic as like we have done for everything else. So I'm going to show you manual and automatic blocking, just for those who have preferences of one over the other. So for manual blocking, it's just about the exact same. The only difference is we do essentially the same stuff that we did in the stop crouching and start crouching logic. So for start manually blocking, this means that our character should go to the block state on a button press. So what we need to do is determine if we are in a proper state to do a standing block or a crouching block. So if the character state is not crouching or already crouch blocking, then we want to go to the standard blocking state. This means we are doing a standing block. Otherwise, if we're in crouching or again already crouch blocking, then we want to go to the crouch blocking state. For start automatically blocking, I've done the same logic. However, it's up to you if you want to do this or not. Again, things like hit stun will change the way our blocks work, because when you're in block stun, you can only do certain actions. So this is up to you if you want to be able to swap this quickly and when we're in these states, or if you want to add extra modifiers. For now, I've left them the same because I like how the manual block works, and I haven't looked into the full implementation for the automatic block with proper hit stun and block stun numbers and everything we can do with that. So for now, like I said, I left it alone. Now, for stop manually blocking, what I do is this. For us to stop blocking, we want to make sure we go back to the proper state. So if we were neutral blocking, standing and blocking, and we release block, we want to go back to our neutral standing state. So if the character is not crouching and not crouch blocking, then we just put them back in default. They're not crouching, so just go back to idle. Otherwise, we are crouching or crouch blocking, but we've stopped blocking, so we want to go straight to the standard crouching state. Okay. Otherwise, for stop automatically blocking, it's the same thing. Because again, for the reasons above, I have not modified them, so manual and automatic are the same, minus the button press. Automatic just fires automatically when blocking against the proximity box, but really, they're the same kind of functionality. Alright, so you can see here, just to make sure that you are aware that all the blocking stuff still works. If I'm manually blocking, I allow the character to continue blocking. They can get pummeled as much as they want. That's what the effect is for now. I can also be, however, if I'm walking backward, even in this corner, I can block automatically by guarding against the hit that the player did. Same with crouch block, actually. You saw that I did not manually press the crouch button, but I was blocking, and so I went into the crouch block state. The logs will also back this up. If I am to stop this, that way the log does not spam. You can see that the character is preparing to block an attack for the opposite direction of the opponent. That was for crouch blocking. That was the last one we did. But if we look for just block in general, you can see that all these times the character was able to successfully block, whether they were manually blocking or automatically blocking. And every single time I tried to automatically block, standing or not, it did successfully go into the block logic. That is a log that we have. And right here in collide with proximity hitbox, you can see that we have this logic to determine if we were pressing back, and then we start the automatic block. That's exactly what we wanted to do, and you can see it's still functioning with all the new systems. So both manual and automatic block work. Alright, to make the logic with the hit stun and the block stun work with our new crouching logic and our new states, what we have to do is update our end stun function to not only be this manually blocking and then setting the state back to blocking if they are, but rather we need to make sure the character is either in the crouching or crouch block state or the standing and neutral state. So doing this here confirms that, and we'll put them back into the blocking or the crouch blocking state if they're manually blocking. Else, they get put into the default or the crouching state, since once the block stun is done, And if they were automatically blocking, it gets reset and they have to go back to the state they were previously in. So updating the logic here will allow us to make all the stun logic work appropriately, regardless if we are standing or crouching. The rest can remain the same in this function and does not need to be touched. Also take note that none of my crouches have any sort of shared rules anymore, specifically between the automatic and manual blocks. We are using different functionality since we do require the manual blocks to have that Boolean set for manual blocking. So you probably don't want to share the transition rules. Same with regular blocks, so idle to block and crouch block, something like that, because they are now different sets of instructions. To go from crouch to crouch block, we have to be crouch blocking, but from idle to block, we have to just be regular blocking. So a shared rule there will actually cause some issues. You should also note that if you are supporting both in the series, like I am, which, again, you don't really ever need to support both, you should have one or the other. But if for some reason you have copied this exactly and you have both manual and automatic blocking, understand that one of them will have to take priority. Otherwise, the transition that requires less usually will, just based on speed, which means that the standard crouch blocking will be taken over the manual blocking, unless you check either and make sure that for the automatic blocking that manual blocking is false, or just change the priority order. Since both of these can fire at the same time, crouch to manual block and crouch to automatic block, you'll want the crouch to automatic block to be priority 2, but the crouch to manual block to be priority 1. So this is the one that's taken when the manual block occurs. Anyway, guys, that's all I got for you today, so thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, please subscribe. There's more for the series and myself than anything else you can do, and I really appreciate it. I want to give a huge shout out to my YouTube membership and Patreon supporters and subscribers. Thank you all for continuing to support the series and continuing to be awesome and support me, and I really appreciate it. If you have any issues with this tutorial or any of my tutorials, feel free to join the Discord community. I'll be happy to help you out. It's completely free and there's a link in the description. Anyway, guys, that's all I got. So once again, thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.